From the moment she was born, Sarah's life seemed to be controlled by the choices of those around her. Her earliest memories were shaped by the decisions of her parents, Sophie and Daniel, who fell in love while still in high school. They married shortly after graduation, and for a time, their world felt complete. The small, cozy house they called home was filled with warmth and joy, where Sarah remembered her father teaching her to ride a bike and her mother baking cookies on weekends. But as the years passed, the relationship between Sophie and Daniel began to fray. Money was tight, and while they didn't argue openly in front of Sarah, she could sense the growing tension. Her father took on more work to support the family, becoming increasingly absent. Sophie, on the other hand, grew more anxious, and Sarah often found herself caught in the middle, unsure of how to navigate the shifting dynamics. Then came Greg. He was everything her father was not: wealthy, charismatic, and always impeccably dressed. Sarah noticed how her mother's face lit up whenever Greg was around. Before long, Sophie made a life-altering decision. She left Daniel and took Sarah with her to live with Greg. The goodbye with her father was etched into Sarah's memory, his eyes heavy with a sorrow she couldn't fully comprehend at the time. Living with Greg was, at first, a whirlwind of excitement. He showered Sarah with gifts, new toys, candy, and once even a trip to an amusement park. Her mother seemed happier, too, as if shedding the weight of her past. But as time went on, the sparkle of their new life dulled. Sarah began to notice a subtle but unmistakable change in her mother. Sophie had become more distant, colder, especially toward her daughter. The tension between them came to a head one evening when Sarah overheard her mother talking to Greg. "She's just like Daniel," Sophie had said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Always asking too many questions, always reminding me of him." The words stung, and though Sarah didn't fully understand at the time, she realized that her very presence was a reminder of the life her mother had left behind. Weekends with her father were her escape. They didn't have much, but Daniel made sure their time together was special, whether it was a trip to the park or cooking dinner together. He never failed to remind Sarah how proud he was of her, always telling her, "You're doing great, kiddo." At Greg's house, things only became worse. Greg wasn't cruel, but his indifference was suffocating. He spent most of his time working, and when he was around, he barely acknowledged Sarah's existence. Meanwhile, Sophie seemed obsessed with maintaining a picture-perfect life, one that Sarah increasingly felt she didn't fit into. Her mother criticized everything from her clothes to her friends, always trying to mold her into someone she wasn't. Things reached a breaking point when Sophie announced she was pregnant with Greg's baby. The news was supposed to bring excitement, but instead, it only made Sarah feel more isolated. The nursery was set up in her old room, and Sarah was moved to a smaller space, a clear sign that she was no longer a priority in her mother's life. When her baby sister, Emily, was born, Sophie's world revolved around her. Emily was perfect, according to everyone, and no one had time for Sarah. Despite her best efforts to be a good big sister, Sarah felt invisible. Her attempts to connect with her mother were met with indifference, and no matter what she achieved, it never seemed to matter. One day, after placing second in the school science fair, Sarah rushed home, certificate in hand, eager to share the news. "Look, Mom, I won." She beamed, hoping for at least a small acknowledgement. Sophie barely glanced up from feeding Emily. "That's nice, dear," she said absently. "Put it on the fridge." The words cut deep. Even in her successes, Sarah was a shadow, a ghost in the background of her mother's perfect life. By the time she reached high school, Sarah had grown numb to the indifference. But the day her mother announced over dinner that she would be moving in with her father, Sarah couldn't hold back the shock. "You're moving in with your dad," Sophie had said matter-of-factly. "We don't have the space or the resources anymore." Sarah's heart sank, though she tried to remain composed. It wasn't the prospect of living with her father that hurt. It was the realization that she was no longer wanted in her mother's new life. Packing her things felt like a slow goodbye, not just to the house, but to any remaining hope of a relationship with Sophie. When Sarah arrived at her father's apartment, he welcomed her with open arms. Though it was small, it quickly became her refuge. Daniel did everything he could to make Sarah feel at home, and his unwavering support gave her the strength she needed to start over. But transitioning to a new school wasn't easy. Sarah was the new girl, and it felt like everyone's eyes were on her. Still, she was determined not to let the past define her. With her father's encouragement, she threw herself into her studies, determined to win a scholarship that would give her a fresh start. And, with time, she made new friends, Kara and Ben, who supported her in ways she never thought possible. When the letter finally arrived, informing her that she had won the scholarship, Sarah felt a wave of pride wash over her. "Dad, I got it," she cried, waving the letter with a grin. Daniel hugged her tightly. "I knew you could do it, kiddo." Years passed, and Sarah's hard work paid off. She built a successful career and found love in a kind and supportive man named Jason. Life was good, but then, out of the blue, her mother called. "Emily's moving to your city for college," Sophie said. "We think it would be best if she stayed with you." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. She hoped that things might be different this time, but old patterns resurfaced quickly. Emily, now a stunning young woman with a penchant for partying, seemed more interested in causing trouble than focusing on her studies. Worse, she began flirting with Jason, testing the limits of Sarah's patience. When Sarah confronted her, Emily just laughed it off. "Oh, come on, Sarah. I'm just having fun." That was the last straw. "You need to find another place to stay," Sarah said firmly. Her mother, predictably, was outraged, accusing Sarah of being jealous and petty. But for the first time, Sarah stood her ground. She had spent too many years trying to win her mother's approval, but now she was focused on her own happiness. When Sophie called again, this time in desperation after Greg's business collapsed and Emily's marriage fell apart, Sarah didn't waver. "I can't help you, Mom," she said, her voice steady. "I'm focusing on my own family now." For the first time in her life, Sarah felt at peace. She had built a life filled with love, with Jason by her side and their first child on the way. And no one, neither her mother nor her past, could take that away from her.